Hello, fellow 3D enthusiast. So, ghosts, are they real? I don't know, but we can make fake ones and hope the real ones don't get mad at us. This is going to be a process breakdown of the shot you see here. I wouldn't quite say it's a tutorial because I skim over some things pretty quickly, but you can get a good idea of how you can get an effect like this. And it takes a really long time. I was kind of surprised that I could finish it in a day. Before we go on, real quick, I'd like to mention that I've created a completely free hydraulic kit bash element pack for you. So these work best with Blender, and there's a link for them in the description. So first of all, this effect would be much easier if I was using a tripod. If you want a good challenge like I did, you can get handheld footage like this. You'll notice in the second half of the footage I vacate the premises and let my cameraman get a nice clean plate of the whole tracking shot. Next step is to take the video clip and put it in Blender's video sequence editor. And with this I'm just going to render out the main part into an image sequence. After that I'm going to go to the clean plate part of the footage and just render out some of those images. You can save an individual image in the render window by hitting Shift S and finding where you want to save that. And a little bit down the road, we're going to use these images to reconstruct the environment. Then I'm just going to load the image sequence into Blender's movie clip editor and start tracking that. And my cousin told me I should never tell anybody that I know how to camera track, so you didn't see anything here, okay? And I'd say maybe a soul-crushing half an hour later, I finished this up. If I mute the footage, you can sort of get an idea of how Blender can see how the camera is moving. Alright, now it's time to add in some A/B keyframes and hit that magical solve button. Now if you're interested in learning how to camera track, there's plenty of tutorials out there. If you want me to make one, you can comment below and tell me that, and I'll put it on my list. Now assuming my track was good, which it wasn't at first, I had to fiddle around a bit, you can hop into the Layout tab, select our camera, and add a camera solver constraint. Now if we hop into the camera view and hit play, it looks like it's traveling down a remote Costa Rican road, which is what we want. There's a little display drop down up here in the corner, and if you hit motion tracking, you can actually see all your tracking points in 3D space, which will help us a bit when we reconstruct later. So for reconstruction, I like to add in a ground plane first, and that sort of gives me a good base to work off of. It's pretty important to line that up correctly. And now for reconstructing the environment, this tutorial sort of builds off last week's tutorial, so if you haven't seen that yet, I would recommend doing that. The only difference here is that I'm reconstructing the environment from multiple photos, which actually turns out to be pretty bonkers. And unfortunately, my final result ended up with some seams in it, which I don't think helped with the believability factor, unfortunately. Huge shout out to the program FSpy though, it really ends up saving a lot of time and headache. At this point, I'm importing the FSpy files, and those are dropping in cameras onto my scene, and these cameras have the correct rotation and resolution, which is pretty nice. I just have to line up the location. Now for the ground plane, and pretty much all the geometry I add in eventually, I'm going to be using an emission shader for the material, and I'm just going to be adding the texture that came with the FSpy file, and projecting that texture onto the geometry. You can project textures like that by going into edit mode, subdividing your mesh a few times, making sure it's all selected, and hitting U, and project from view. It's pretty important to conserve your energy when you're reconstructing things like this. So to do that, the only parts of my environment that I'm reconstructing are the parts that are going to be right behind my actor. And you can see it's starting to come together here. Time to import in my next FSpy file. After I've lined this camera up, I'm just creating a new material that's pretty much exactly the same, except it's got the new texture. And I'm just projecting this onto the new parts of the environment that I hadn't gotten before. And you can see those pesky seams that I was talking about before. Still haven't figured out a way to fix that. Starting to get there though. It really keeps me going to see these cool 3D pans going on. For a lot of the geometry, you don't have to be very specific about what you're modeling. It could just be a randomized pile of vertices, and it ends up looking alright. I think I used 5 different cameras to project these textures on, so this literally took hours. Like I mentioned though, it's really rewarding to see it all come together. Now I'm going to create a really quick and dirty digital double, and I'm just going to sort of place that over top of the actor in the scene. Kinda looks like me if I were like a marshmallow potato man or something. I'm also going to add in some super basic legs and just give those some shape keys that look like they're in walking positions. Once all the tracking and reconstruction was done, it actually was pretty fun to animate this guy. You can see if I animate the shape keys, the legs actually look like they're walking, which is nice. Solid. Now this digital approximation double thing will actually serve two purposes. One will be for a mask, and the other will be for smoke emission. Once we set up this new domain, everything will be almost ready to go. Let's start with the emitter object. Turns out ghost smoke is actually a lot less dense than other smoke, so I'm going to turn that down real quick. Now with the domain selected, resolution divisions should be 64, and temperature difference should be at 0 because this is a cold ghost. Now I'm going to add in a turbulence force and parent that behind the digital double. And once we bake that in, that'll just make our smoke go woo! Now if you check high resolution, that'll make the smoke look better, but it'll also make your computer go woo! Now it turns out before I did this tutorial, I didn't really actually know how to render smoke in Eevee, but now I do. And this isn't even really smoke actually, it's just emission stuff. So I got an attribute node, typed density into the field there, and then put the factor into the strength of the emission. And that big fat node in the middle there is a volume principle shader thing, and that actually just plugs into the volume of the material output. For the longest time, I wasn't sure why the principled volume wasn't working, then I realized I had it plugged into the surface input, so yeah, volume input, that's the one you want. I also thought it'd be a great idea to add in a add shader, and then just subtract from the attribute node. It wasn't the best idea. I should have been using a multiply node instead of an add node. Oh well. That made the smoke less thick. Alright, let's tie this all together. I'm going to go into the node editor and nope, never mind. I'm going to tell you about view layers. So this drop down up here displays the view layers. We're going to have 3 of them. One is going to be our background, one is going to be our mask, and then one will be our smoke emission. So I'm going to make sure I have my reconstructed environment grouped together on one collection. I'm going to have my digital double in another collection, and then I'm going to have my digital double smoke emitter and domain on another collection. Now the view layers don't duplicate your collections in any way. They're actually different configurations of enabled collections. So in this case, I'm going to want to have my first view layer be my environment, and on that view layer, I only want that collection to be checked. And the same goes for the other 2 view layers and collections. In case you're wondering how to move stuff around between collections, if you have your object selected and you hit M, you can create a new collection for it, or you can move it around between the different collections. For the mask object, I went into object data and dropped down the view thing here, and you can see it is indeed viewing in the render, so that's good. However, for our smoke emitter, that's basically the same digital double, except it's a duplicate and it's emitting smoke. I do not want that to be shown in the render. What else? For our mask digital double, I made sure the background was completely black, and that the material on it was a emission set to white, so I have a black and white mask going on. Now finally, back to the compositing. You can see the view layers finally worked out. I've got my reconstructed environment here, and that's all tracked to the camera and everything. I've also got my mask view layer, and we've got the smoke view layer going pretty well. Now I've added a blur node to the mask just to make that a little bit smoother, and I used that output to mix the digital reconstruction with the actual live action footage, which looks a little something like this. Now after I get the clean plate, it's important to mix in the original footage with this mix node, and do that just a little bit so you can get that nice see-through look. And once that's finished, I drop in an add node and add in that smoke. Once again, just a little bit goes a long way. I noticed in my final result when it was moving around in the different lighting settings, it was pretty important to keyframe these 2 values just to get the optimal look in different lighting situations. Right, last thing. If you go to the render tab here and go into color management, it's important to change that from filmic to standard. hope you enjoyed that. Hope it was helpful. And if you like this, there's some more exciting stuff coming soon. So yeah, stay tuned. Cheers.